When I was praying for this talk, I was asked to speak about my third book, which is Journey to Freedom.
Kad sam razmišljao što ću govoriti večeras, zamoljen sam da govorim o svojoj trećoj knjizi Put u slobodu.
Unfortunately, it's not in Croatian yet.
Nažalost, još nije prevedena na hrvatski.
But if anyone speaks and wants to translate it, please come to me afterwards.
Ali ako neko govori engleski i želi ju prevesti, dođite k meni nakon nagovora.
But when I was praying about this, I've got a friend who, when he was a young boy, for some reason his mother hated him.
Kad sam razmišljao o večerašnjem nagovoru, sjetio sam se prijatelja koji iz nekog razloga dok je bio dijete nije bio ljubljen od strane svoje majke.
And she used to humiliate him at every opportunity.
I u svakoj prilici bi ga ponižavala.
And she loved his siblings, his brother and sister.
Voljela je njegovog brata i sestru,
But for some reason she hated him.
ali iz nekog razloga njega je mrzila.
To the point where she used to put cigarettes out on him.
Do te mjere da je znala gasiti opuške cigareta na njemu.
At the age of 10 years old,
U dobi od 10 godina,
unlike me, he did not get angry and become a gangster.
za razliku od mene, on nije postao ljut i postao gangster.
He felt that someone must love him.
Osjećao je da ga neko mora voljeti.
And he found this amazing love for God the Father.
I našao je sebi tu nevjerojatnu ljubav prema Bogu Ocu.
And each day, at the end of his day,
I na kraju svakog dana,
from the age of 10,
od dobi od 10 godina,
he would write a diary.
pisao je dnevnik
And it was a letter to God the Father,
i pisao bi pismo Bogu Ocu,
telling him about his day
govoreći mu o svom danu
and thanking him for all the blessings in his day.
i zahvaljujući mu za sve blagoslove u tom danu.
I had the honor of meeting David when he was in his 30s.
Ja sam imao tu čast upoznati Davida kad je bio u 30. godinama.
He was working unpaid as a volunteer in a very poor council estate.
Radio je kao volonter u jednoj siromašnoj četvrti.
And when I walked into this office,
I kad sam ušao u njegov ured,
straight away he said, "You're a Christian."
odmah mi je rekao, ti si kršćanin.
And I said, "How did you know?"
A ja sam ga pitao kako zna.
And he said, "I can see the light in you."
A on je rekao, mogu vidjeti svjetlo u tebi.
And we became very close friends.
I postali smo vrlo bliski prijatelji.
And over the months and years that we were friends,
I tijekom mjeseci i godina u kojima smo bili prijatelji,
he was one of the first people I ever met who never said a bad word about anyone.
on je bio jedan od prvih ljudi koje sam upoznao koji nikad ni o kome nije rekao ružnu riječ.
He only saw the beauty in everyone,
Samo je vidio ljepotu u svakome.
even his own mother,
Čak i u svojoj vlastitoj majci,
who hurt him so much.
koja ga je tako jako povrijedila.
And he had never been baptized.
I nikad nije bio kršten.
And one time he said to me he wanted to go to adoration.
I jednom mi je rekao da bi volio otići na klanjanje.
And I laughed because he had lots of problems with the Catholic Church.
Ja sam se nasmijao jer je on imao zapravo puno poteškoća vezano uz katoličku crkvu.
But he said that he believed it was Jesus through what I had shared with him.
Ali on je vjerovao da je to Isus prema onom što sam ja s njim podijelio.
So I took him to a church where he went to adoration.
Onda sam ga odveo u crkvu gdje je otišao na euharistijsko klanjanje.
And he sat there for 3 hours.
I on je tamo sjedio 3 sata.
And he didn't move.
I nije se micao.
And tears just rolled down his face.
Suze su samo klizile niz njegovo lice.
And I knew that Jesus was reaching into his heart.
I znao sam da Isus dotiče njegovo srce
Bringing his healing and freedom.
i donosi svoje iscijeljenje i slobodu.
He came out of there and asked if he could become a Catholic.
Izašao je s klanjanja i pitao može li postati katolik.
And I had the honor of setting up an RCIA course for him with a priest and a nun.
I ja sam imao tu čast dogovoriti za njega pripremu za krštenje, dakle katekumenat sa jednim svećenikom i časnom sestrom.
But he still suffered with a lot of pain from his childhood.
Ali još uvijek je jako patio zbog boli iz djetinjstva.
And because this nun spoke badly about people,
I iz razloga što je ta časna sestra govorila loše o ljudima,
and he was very fragile,
a on je bio vrlo krhak,
he didn't want to carry on the becoming a Catholic.
Nije htio nastaviti s pripremom za sakramente tu.
I joined the prayer house in Scotland.
Ja sam se pridružio jednoj molitvenoj zajednici u Škotskoj.
And David, because I wasn't allowed any car or anything in this prayer house, he looked after my car.
I u toj zajednici nije mi bilo dozvoljeno imati auto, tako da se David brinuo za moj auto.
One time I was coming back from the prayer house for a little break over Easter.
Jednom prilikom vraćao sam se za Uskrs u tu zajednicu.
And I went to get my car from David and visit him.
I otišao sam uzeti svoj auto od Davida i posjetiti ga.
And there was no answer when I knocked on the door.
I niko nije odgovarao kad sam kucao na vrata.
And so I shouted through the letterbox.
Onda sam kroz kaslić vikao.
And David came to the door very disheveled and looked like he hadn't eaten or slept for weeks.
I David je došao do vrata potpuno skrhan i izgledao je kao da nije jeo danima.
And he said since Good Friday he had this terrible pain in his head.
I rekao je da od Velikog petka je imao užasnu bol u glavi.
And he couldn't move or get out of bed.
I nije se mogao micati ili izaći iz kreveta.
And he hadn't eaten or drunk for many days.
I danima nije jeo niti pio.
But when I shouted through the letterbox, immediately this pain left him.
Kad sam poviknuo kroz kaslić, odmah ga je bol napustila.
And I thought, well, maybe it's part of his depression, and I asked him to come to the prayer house with me.
Pomislio sam da je to dio njegove depresije i zamolio ga da pođe sa mnom u molitvenu zajednicu.
And the prayer house in Scotland is purely based on Medjugorje.
A ta molitvena zajednica, ta kuća, je potpuno zasnovana na principima Međugorja.
It's called Craig Lodge.
Zove se Craig Lodge.
And one time Mirjana had a vision out of when there wasn't meant to be a vision with Gospa at this prayer house.
I jednom prilikom Mirjana je u toj zajednici imala viđenje kad nije bilo ni očekivano da će imati viđenje,
And Gospa
ukazanje.
said, whoever comes to this prayer house will feel my love.
I Gospa je rekla tko god dođe u ovu molitvenu kuću osjetit će moju ljubav.
And David was in this prayer house with me for a few weeks.
I David je bio u toj molitvenoj kući i zajednici sa mnom nekoliko tjedana.
And one day he came down from the mountain which is based on Crucifix.
I jednom prilikom spustio se s brda koje je bilo nekako osmišljeno prema principu križevca.
And he had tears rolling down his face.
I suze su mu klizile niz lice.
And he said, I've met my real mother.
I rekao je, upoznao sam svoju pravu majku.
The Gospel.
Gospu.
And she has touched my heart with her love.
I dotaknula je moje srce svojom ljubavlju.
And she has told me that it isn't my fault that my mother couldn't love me.
I rekla mi je da nisam ja kriv što me majka nije mogla voljeti.
The next day I went in to see David.
Sljedeći dan sam otišao obići Davida.
And the last words he ever spoke was thank you John, thank you John, thank you John.
I zadnje riječi koje mi je rekao bile su hvala ti Johne, hvala ti Johne, hvala ti Johne.
And he had this terrible brain hemorrhage.
I nakon toga je imao krvarenje na mozgu.
And he was baptized on his deathbed.
I bio je kršten na samrti.
And I was very angry at God.
I ja sam se ljutio na Boga
for taking away my best friend
što mi je oduzeo najboljeg prijatelja
at 38 years old.
U dobi od 38 godina.
And I went over to this island to get a retreat.
I otišao sam na jedan otok kako bi držao duhovnu obnovu.
It's called Iona and it's the first Christian island in the UK.
Zove se Iona i to je prvi kršćanski otok u Ujedinjenom kraljevstvu.
And there was a little picture of Gospa.
I tamo je bila mala slika Gospe.
And I said, why did you take my best friend?
I pitao sam ju zašto si uzela mog najboljeg prijatelja.
And I felt her sitting on my right hand side and David sitting on my left.
I osjećao sam kako ona sjedi s moje desne strane, a David s lijeve strane.
And he said to me, I am free.
I rekao mi je, slobodan sam.
I am happy.
Radostan sam.
And I am in heaven.
I u nebu sam.
1,200 people came to his funeral.
12,000 ljudi došlo je na njegov pogreb.
All the people who he used to help, listening to their problems, not being paid.
Svi oni ljudi kojima je pomogao slušajući njihove probleme bez da mu je to bilo plaćeno.
And I had the honor of putting his little possessions together because he didn't know much.
I ja sam imao tu čast da skupim sve njegove stvari koje je imao.
And I read his last letter in his diary to God the Father.
I pročitao sam njegovo zadnje pismo u dnevniku namijenjeno Bogu Ocu.
The day he died.
Taj dan kad je umro.
And it said that I realize now that I always had a mother who loved me.
I napisao je, sada shvaćam da sam uvijek imao majku koja me ljubi.
A mother who wanted the best for me.
Majku koja mi je željela sve najbolje.
A mother who led me to a humble son who come to me in the form of bread.
Majku koja me povela svom poniznom sinu koji je došao k meni u obliku kruha.
I hope to meet her again soon.
Nadam se da ću je ponovno susresti uskoro.
David was baptized on his deathbed.
David je bio kršten na smrtnoj postelji.
In my own life when I was 10 years old,
U mom životu kad sam imao 10 godina,
I had suffered every form of abuse it was possible to suffer.
trpio sam od svake vrste zlostavljanja koju je bilo moguće podnositi.
Physical, mental, sexual.
Fizičko zlostavljanje, mentalno, seksualno.
And I was very angry inside.
I bio sam jako ljut u dubini.
And instead of looking for love,
I umjesto da sam tražio ljubav,
I looked for hate.
tražio sam mržnju.
And that's why, as you heard my story, I became this broken man who hurt many people.
I iz tog razloga, kao što ste čuli u mojoj priči, postao sam taj ljuti čovjek koji je povrijedio mnoge ljude.
After I had my conversion,
Nakon svog obraćenja,
I ended up in that same prayer house.
završio sam u istoj toj molitvenoj zajednici.
Probably about 2 months after I entered,
Vjerojatno negdje otprilike 2 mjeseca nakon što sam ušao,
10 months before David's visit,
10 mjeseci prije Davidovog posjeta,
a priest prayed over me in that prayer house.
jedan svećenik se pomolio za mene u toj molitvenoj kući.
And I had a picture of this demonic type beast locked up inside of me.
I imao sam sliku tog jednog demonskog bića zaključanog u meni.
Like a demon locked up inside.
Kao da je demon bio zaključan u mojoj nutrini.
I honestly thought, am I possessed?
Zapravo sam pomislio jesam li opsjednut.
And it wasn't the priest who got this picture. I got the picture as he prayed over me.
I nije svećenik dobio tu sliku, nego sam ju ja dobio dok se on molio za mene.
And I didn't tell a soul about this picture.
I nikom živom nisam rekao za tu sliku.
After I left that prayer house,
Nakon što sam napustio tu molitvenu kuću,
I joined the Franciscans of the Renewal in the Bronx in New York.
pridružio sam se Franjevcima u Bronxu u New Yorku.
And when I was there, you have to sleep on the floor.
I kad sam bio tamo, morao sam spavati na podu kao i ostali.
You only get to eat the food that people give you,
Možeš jesti samo hranu koju ljudi donesu.
which means you don't eat many days.
To znači da danima možda i ne pojedeš ništa.
You only own what you're given, so you own very little, just the clothes or the habit that you're in.
Posjeduješ jako malo, zapravo samo odjeću i taj habit koji imaš na sebi.
You pray a lot
Puno moliš
and you work very hard.
i puno radiš.
And I remember saying to God during this time when I was visiting,
I sjećam se da sam rekao Bogu u to vrijeme kad sam bio u tom franjevačkom samostanu,
thinking I was to be there for the rest of my life.
misleći kako ću tamo biti ostatak života.
Surely you don't hate me enough to leave me here for the rest of my life.
Valjda me ne mrziš toliko da me ostaviš ovdje cijeli život.
I remember praying a 9-day novena
Sjećam se kako sam molio devetnicu
for ice cream.
za sladoled.
I hadn't had ice cream for over 6 months.
Nisam jeo sladoled preko 6 mjeseci.
And I was being tortured.
I bio sam mučen.
Morning, noon and night.
Ujutro, u podne i na večer.
And one consolation I got,
I jedina utjeha koju sam dobio,
the most beautiful consolation I always got,
najljepša utjeha koju sam uvijek dobio,
was when I went into the chapel.
bila je kad bih došao u kapelicu.
It was like from going to hell to going to heaven.
To je bilo kao da iz pakla idem u nebo.
And often when I was in the chapel,
I često kad sam bio u kapelici,
I'd get a picture of this beast, this locked up, wretched monster inside.
ponovno bih vidio sliku te zvijeri, tog zaključanog čudovišta u sebi.
But slowly I saw these bricks being knocked down and the thing was being released.
Ali polako sam vidio kako cigle padaju i kako se to čudovište izlazi iz oklopa.
Eventually, with the help of my spiritual director,
Na kraju, uz pomoć mog duhovnika,
I discerned that I wasn't meant to stay a Franciscan friar of the Renault.
Raspoznao sam da mi nije bilo namijenjeno biti franjevac do kraja života. Hvala ti, Isusu.
And I was leaving the Bronx in New York.
I napustio sam Bronx i New York.
And I was praying to Jesus,
I molio sam se Isusu
asking him what I should do now.
i pitao ga što mi je činiti.
And I opened up the scriptures,
I otvorio sam Sveto pismo.
and the scripture reading I read,
the
scripture reading I read when I opened up the
Aha,
scriptures,
all right. I u evanđelju, u Svetom pismu sam pročitao
was where the centurion is told, go home, your servant is healed.
gdje piše idi doma, tvoj sluga je ozdravljen.
But I knew that I wasn't healed.
Ali znao sam da nisam još bio ozdravljen.
And I saw a picture of this wounded, wretched child locked up inside me again.
I ponovno sam vidio sliku tog ranjenog djeteta zaključanog u meni.
And I felt Jesus say, reach out to him.
I osjetio sam kako mi Isus govori, poveži se s njim.
And as I went to reach out to this child, this wretched, wounded, broken monster,
I kad sam nekako pružio ruku tom djetetu, tom jadnom, izmučenom čudovištu u sebi,
it wouldn't come anywhere near me.
nije mi se htjelo približiti.
And I left.
I otišao sam.
And I set up some of the biggest Catholic retreats in England's history.
I pokrenuo sam neke od najvećih duhovnih obnova u povijesti Engleske.
One in Walsingham where over 2,000 young people come every year, and they've been doing that for 10 years.
Jedno u mjestu gdje 2000 mladih ljudi dolazi svake godine, već 10 godina.
And lots of other amazing retreats.
I puno drugih prekrasnih duhovnih obnova.
And towards the end of this year of miracles after miracles,
I tijekom godina bilo je čudesa koja su se događala jedno za drugim.
I asked this very humble priest if he would be my spiritual director.
Pitao sam jednog poniznog svećenika je li bi htio biti moj duhovnik.
And he said, I'll pray about it.
I on je rekao da će se pomoliti pa vidjeti.
And 2 weeks later he said yes.
2 tjedna kasnije pristao je.
And he gave me these papers.
I dao mi je papire.
And the first thing I read
I prva stvar koju sam pročitao
was get in touch with the wounded child within.
bila je dođi u dodir sa ranjenim djetetom u sebi.
And the paper read how each one of us has a child that's trapped inside of us.
I na papiru je pisalo kako svatko od nas u svojoj nutrini ima ranjeno dijete.
And the more we've been wounded as a child, the more that child is wretched and broken and afraid.
I što smo više bili ranjeni u djetinjstvu, to je to dijete u nama jadnije, više ranjeno.
And he started this program very much like Unbound with me.
I započeo je jedan program sa mnom koji je sličan programu Unbounda.
And I remember going to him on one occasion.
I sjećam se kako sam jednom prilikom otišao k njemu.
And each day you're asked to spend 20 minutes in front of Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament.
I svaki dan imaš zadatak provesti 20 minuta pred Isusom u presvetom.
In front of the Blessed Adoration.
U klanjanju.
And you just ask Jesus to put you in touch with the wounded child within.
I zamoliš Isusa da te poveže sa ranjenim djetetom u tvojoj nutrini.
And on one occasion, this was very small, but I saw me showing my mum a picture I painted.
I jednom prilikom vidio sam sebe kao malog dječaka kako majci pokažem jednu sliku koju sam nacrtao.
And I was about 6 or 7.
A imao sam 6 ili 7 godina.
And she said, go away, I haven't got time.
I ona je rekla, otiđi, nemam vremena sada.
And then I showed my dad this picture I had painted.
Onda sam pokazao tati tu sliku koju sam nacrtao.
And he said, go away, I'm watching television.
A on je rekao, odi sada, gledam televizor.
And this was just one day out of many, many days of 20 minutes in front of Jesus.
I to je bio samo jedan od dana u sklopu tih 20 minuta koje bih provodio pred presvetim.
But later on that day I asked the priest I was staying with to come and see the work I had done on this hall for him.
Kasnije sam zamolio tog svećenika da dođe pogledati nešto što sam napravio za njega u predvorju.
And he said, I'll come when I've got time.
A on je rekao, doći ću kad budem imao vremena.
And as I put the phone down,
i kad sam spustio slušalicu,
I realized why I needed everyone to give me that grace of knowing that what I had done was good.
Znao sam zašto imam takvu potrebu da mi svatko kaže zašto sam dobar u nečemu.
Up to that point, I'd always hated the fact that I was always telling people my good works.
Do tog trenutka mrzio sam činjenicu da sam se uvijek imao potrebu dokazivati ljudima.
And then I realized that I needed that consolation because I never got it as a child. I never got that encouragement. I never got that affirmation.
Onda sam shvatio da mi je ta utjeha bila potrebna jer ju nikad kao dijete nisam dobio, tu jednu potvrdu.
I still need that affirmation.
Još uvijek mi je potrebna ta potvrda.
I still need that encouragement.
Još uvijek mi je potrebno takvo ohrabrenje.
That wound is still there.
Ta rana je još uvijek prisutna.
But now I love that part of me.
Ali sada volim taj dio sebe.
One time I was driving in the car.
Jednom prilikom vozio sam se u autu.
And I felt so alone.
I tako sam se osjećao usamljeno.
At this time I had friends everywhere.
U to vrijeme imao sam prijatelje na sve strane.
I was very popular.
Bio sam jako popularan.
But as I was praying, I just felt so alone.
Ali dok sam se molio, osjetio sam se tako usamljeno.
And I realized as a child there was many times where I felt completely alone, completely unloved by everyone.
I shvatio sam da sam se isto tako osjećao kao dijete često puta potpuno sam i nevoljen od ikoga.
And there was many times where I really felt alone.
I bilo je puno prilika kad sam se osjećao vrlo usamljeno.
And I felt Gospel say to me, you was never alone.
I osjećao sam da mi Gospa govori, nikad nisi bio sam.
I was with you every moment of your childhood.
Bila sam s tobom u svakom trenutku tvoga djetinjstva,
but you didn't know me.
ali nisi me poznavao.
And I was crying so much that I had to pull over the car.
I toliko sam plakao da sam morao zaustaviti auto.
And slowly through these many times where I felt what I should have felt as a child, but I wouldn't allow myself because I was so scared.
I u tim prilikama kad sam osjećao to što sam osjećao kao dijete i nisam si to dopuštao osjećati,
When I saw a picture of this child, it was becoming beautiful.
kad sam vidio unutrini sliku tog djeteta, postajala mi je lijepa.
It wasn't wretched anymore.
Nije više izgledala onako jadno.
It wasn't demonic looking.
Nije izgledala demonski.
He looked like a little boy.
Izgledala je kao jedan mali dječak.
And when, as an adult, I would go to reach out to him in my prayer,
I kad sam kao odrasla osoba u svojim molitvama pomagao drugima,
he started to come towards me.
Tom djetetu, ono bi dolazilo meni u susret.
And I started becoming one with him.
I počeo sam se nekako sjedinjavati s njim.
There was lots of me that I couldn't control.
Bilo je puno toga u mojoj nutrini što nisam mogao kontrolirati.
There was lots of me where the child ran me as an adult. A lots of me where the child controlled me as an adult.
Bilo je puno toga u meni, još iz djetinjstva, što me kontroliralo dok sam bio već odrasla osoba.
Like I was always looking for affirmation.
Kao na primjer to što sam uvijek tražio potvrdu.
But much more serious areas of this.
Ali i puno ozbiljnija područja toga.
But slowly I saw that this child wasn't controlling me anymore.
Ali polako sam uviđao da me to dijete više ne kontrolira.
And the adult was becoming in control.
I ova odrasla osoba je počela imati kontrolu.
And I was being set free.
I postao sam slobodan.
And I remember meeting this very, very holy nun at this period of time.
I u to vrijeme sjećam se kako sam upoznao jednu vrlo svetu, časnu sestru.
And I asked her to pray over me.
I zamolio sam ju da se pomoli za mene.
And she prayed over me.
I pomolila se za mene.
And she said, you need more healing than anyone I've ever met in my entire life as a nun.
I rekla je, tebi je potrebno više iscijeljenja nego bilo kome drugom koga sam dosad susrela u životu.
She was 85.
A imala je 85 godina i upoznala mnoge ljude.
This is how messed up I was inside.
Evo, to pokazuje koliko sam u sebi bio zbrkan.
I said, thanks, sister, that really encourages me.
Rekao sam, hvala sestro, to mi je stvarno ohrabrenje.
I remember going to Father Herlihy, the one who I'd asked to be my spiritual director.
Sjećam se kako sam otišao ovom svećeniku kojeg sam zamolio da mi bude duhovnik.
And I was very angry.
I bio sam jako ljut.
And I said to him, I feel like I'm being crucified every single day.
I rekao sam mu, osjećam kao da me se razapinje svaki dan.
And he looked at me and he smiled.
On me pogledao i nasmiješio se.
And he said, no, you're just in the garden of Gethsemane.
Ne, ti si samo u Getsemanskom vrtu.
And Jesus, like Jesus, you are being passed the cup.
I kao Isusu, tebi se daje kalež.
Your crucifixion hasn't even begun yet.
Tvoje raspeće nije još niti započelo.
And I tell you, he was right.
I kažem vam, bio je u pravu.
I went through so much self-examination where I had to go through all these layers and layers of being set free in all these areas. The anger, the sexual abuse, the pain.
Prošao sam kroz sve te slojeve gdje sam morao se osloboditi raznih aspekata u sebi, ljutnje i različitih osjećaja od kojih sam se trebao osloboditi.
But in every situation where I thought I can't take it anymore,
ali u svakoj situaciji kad sam pomislio ne mogu to više izdržati,
like my friend David, I had a mother.
Poput mog prijatelja Davida, imao sam majku. Gospu.
Who's saying to me, it's okay, I'm here.
Koja mi je govorila, u redu je, ja sam tu.
Encouraging me and loving me.
ohrabrivala me i voljela.
and not letting me give up.
I nije mi dopuštala da odustanem.
And I can say to you with my hand on my heart
I mogu vam reći sa rukom na svom srcu
that I never went through such pain as I thought was possible.
da nikad nisam prošao kroz takvu bol, niti mislio da je to moguće.
And I remember going to Lourdes,
I sjećam se kad sam išao u Lourdes
and I was with a group of people who were all there for a retreat.
i bio sam s grupom ljudi koji su tamo išli na duhovnu obnovu
And I was really praying and really opening up to God.
i molio sam se i otvarao srce Bogu.
And the lady who was running the pilgrimage was a bit of a saint.
I gospođa koja je vodila hodočašće bila je poput neke vrste sveca.
And she was probably the freest person I've ever met.
I vjerojatno najslobodnija osoba koju sam ikad upoznao.
She couldn't care less what anyone thought.
Bilo joj je baš briga što itko misli.
She didn't make people happy.
Nije se trudila usrećivati ljude.
She only made God happy.
Samo je usrećivala Boga.
And I remember thinking, how can you be so free?
I sjećam se da sam razmišljao kako možeš biti tako slobodna.
And we were sitting at this meal table.
I sjedili smo za stolom.
And this lady was sitting opposite me and this woman who was running the pilgrimage, the very free lady.
I jedna gospođa sjedila je preko puta mene i ove gospođe koja je vodila hodočašće.
And she said, I want what you two have got.
I ona je rekla, ja želim ono što vas dvoje imate.
And she burst into tears.
I počela je plakati.
And the very free lady looked at her.
I gospođa koja je bila slobodna pogledala joj je.
And she said, but are you willing to be crucified to receive it?
I pitala, jeste li spremni biti raspeti kako bi to primili?
Are you willing to be crucified to receive it?
Jeste li spremni biti raspeti kako bi to primili?
And I realized that all the suffering that I had gone through and was going through,
I shvatio sam da sva ona patnja kroz koju sam prolazio i kroz koju još uvijek prolazim,
this woman had also gone through.
da je takvu patnju prošla i ova gospođa o kojoj sam govorio.
And that's why she was so free.
I to je razlog zašto je bila tako slobodna.
So if you want a freedom,
Tako da ako želite slobodu,
if you want to taste heaven on earth,
ako želite kušati nebo na zemlji,
if you want Gospa to take every wound from your heart and present it to her son,
ako želite da Gospa uzme svaku ranu iz vašeg srca i predaju svom sinu
and have him heal every part of your heart,
i da mu je dadaju iscijeli
to a level that I never thought was possible on earth,
do te mjere za koju nisam znao da je moguće uopće ovdje na zemlji,
are you being willing to be crucified to receive it?
jeste li spremni biti raspeti kako bi to primili?
Because I do not believe that we can taste true freedom on earth
Jer mislim da ne možemo kušati pravu slobodu ovdje na zemlji
without going through the crucifixion.
bez toga da prođemo kroz raspeće.
A lot of our Protestant brothers and sisters look at Jesus, his cross, and think he saved me.
Mnogi od naših braća i sestara koji su protestanti gledaju Kristov križ i misle on me spasio.
And they're dancing around the crucified, rejoicing because they've been saved.
I plešu oko raspeća, radosni zato što su spašeni.
But they don't see a woman who's standing by the cross,
Ali ne vide ženu koja stoji pored križa,
a very humble woman
poniznu ženu,
who had her heart pierced by a sword,
kojoj je srce bilo probodeno mačem
asking us to take her hand
i koja nam pruža svoju ruku
and take us through the crucifixion
i da nas provede kroz raspeće
to the resurrection which is on the other side.
do uskrsnuća koje se nalazi s druge strane,
The true resurrection,
onog pravog uskrsnuća,
where we go through every part of Jesus where we've crucified him,
gdje prolazimo kroz svaki dio toga što je Isus proživio pri razapinjanju
and we face all the pain,
i suočavamo se sa svom boli,
having the reassurance of our Gospel holding our hand,
imajući tu utjehu da nas Gospod drži za ruku,
and then we receive the freedom.
i onda dobivamo slobodu.
Many years later,
Puno godina kasnije,
having done this process for many, many years,
nakon što sam prolazio kroz taj proces godinama,
I was in Belfast,
bio sam u Belfastu
and I woke up this morning
i jedno jutro sam se probudio
and I felt a freedom and a grace that I had never felt before.
i osjećao sam slobodu i takvu milost koju nikad prije nisam osjećao.
I had a freedom that I was complete.
Imao sam slobodu i osjećaj da sam potpun.
And like most of the spiritual graces I had received,
I kao i većina duhovnih milosti koje sam primio,
I thought this can't last long.
pomislio sam ovo ne može dugo trajati.
But I enjoy it while it's here.
Ali uživat ću u tome dok je tu.
After 3 months, I still felt exactly the same freedom.
Nakon 3 mjeseca osjećao sam istu tu slobodu.
And I met that nun who I'd met 2 years before.
I ponovno sam sreo onu časnu sestru koju sam sreo 2 godine ranije.
She was now 87.
Sad je imala 87 godina.
And I said, "Sister, will you pray over me?"
I pitao sam, sestro, hoćete se pomoliti za mene?
And she looked a bit frightened.
I pogledala me prestrašeno
And she said, "Yes."
i rekla može.
And as she prayed over me,
I kad se molila za mene,
I didn't tell her anything about the freedom I felt
nisam joj ništa rekao o slobodi koju sam osjećao
or the program of healing I'd been doing.
ili programu iscijeljenja kroz koji sam prolazio.
And she said to me, "I believe you are free.
I rekla mi je, vjerujem da si slobodan.
You have received all the healing you need.
Primio si svo iscijeljenje koje ti je potrebno.
And you are free enough to now begin your journey to become a saint."
I dovoljno si slobodan da započneš svoje putovanje kako bi postao svet.
In other words, all that had just led me up to being complete enough as a person to begin my journey as sanctity, to begin my journey.
To me sve dovelo do toga da budem dovoljno potpun kako bi mogao započeti svoj put ka svetosti.
Freedom doesn't mean holiness.
Sloboda ne znači svetost.
Freedom doesn't mean that we're not tempted with all the sins.
Sloboda ne znači da nećemo biti iskušavani različitim grijesima.
Or else I wouldn't have needed an English speaking priest.
U protivnom ne bi mi trebao svećenik koji govori engleski.
I would have already been sparkly.
Već bih sav blistao.
But every day I need God's mercy.
Ali svaki dan potrebna mi je Božja milost.
Because I'm still trying to become a saint.
Jer još uvijek pokušavam postati svet.
But you know, that freedom has never ever gone.
Ali znate, ta sloboda nikad me nije napustila.
And that was 19 years ago in Belfast when I woke up.
A to je bilo prije 19 godina u Belfastu, to jutro kad sam se probudio.
I never thought it was possible
Nikad nisam mislio da je moguće
to be so happy in life.
biti tako sretan u životu.
I feel no worry, I feel no fear.
Ne osjećam zabrinutost, ne osjećam strah.
And the second I do, I'm turning to Gospel and saying, "Why has my peace gone?"
I te sekunde kad počnem osjećati strah ili zabrinutost, okrećem se Gospi i pitam kamo je nestao moj mir.
And I say this in all humility. The last time I felt like that was months ago where I had lost my peace.
I ovo govorim u svoj poniznosti. Zadnji put kad sam se tako osjećao bilo je prije nekoliko mjeseci.
Most of the time I'm just in a stupor of just not worrying, not fearing, just so happy and so complete.
Većinu vremena sam jednostavno u miru, bez brige i radostan.
But you know, that child that was so wretched and broken inside,
Ali znate, ono dijete koje je bilo tako shrvano u mojoj nutrini,
every now and then he still needs a hug.
povremeno i dan danas mu je potreban zagrljaj.
He still needs reassuring.
Još uvijek mu je potrebno ohrabrenje.
And you know, one of my friends asked me to come to a retreat.
I jedan od mojih prijatelja zamolio me da dođem na jednu duhovnu obnovu.
She runs retreats for school kids
Odnosno
in Knock, the
prijateljica.
shrine of Our Lady in Ireland.
Ona vodi duhovne obnove za djecu u jednom mjestu u Irskoj.
And she said, John, you're always giving retreats. I want you to receive a retreat.
I rekla mi je, John, ti uvijek držiš duhovne obnove, sad želim da ti jednostavno dođeš na duhovnu obnovu.
This was about, I'd say, 6-7 years ago.
To je bilo prije otprilike 6 ili 7 godina.
So I said, yeah, great.
Rekao sam, može.
So at the retreat, she was telling the kids that we was there over Eucharistic adoration.
I na duhovnoj obnovi rekla je djeci da ćemo imati euharistijsko klanjanje.
And Jesus was there come to each one of them.
I Isus će doći do svakog od njih.
And you would be invited to reach out and touch the cloak like the woman healed by the hemorrhage.
I bilo im je dopušteno ispružiti ruku i dotaknuti njegove haljine kao što je to učinila žena koja je patila od krvarenja.
And the priest had his humeral vow around the monstrance, so he was acting as holding Jesus, and that was Jesus's cloak.
I svećenik je držao monstrancu i išao prema mladima, a monstranca je bila kao haljina Isusova.
And she said, I want you, before the healing service starts,
I rekla mi je, prije nego što počne služba ozdravljenja,
to think of what you're afraid of.
da razmišljaš o tome čega se bojiš.
Think of when you leave this place, when you go home. Now these are school kids. What are you afraid of?
Razmisli o tome kad odeš s ovog mjesta i kreneš doma, što je ono čega ćeš se bojati.
So I thought, well, I've got to join in like them, so I'm thinking, what am I afraid of?
Pa onda sam si razmišljao od čega bi se to ja mogao bojati.
At that time I was the leader of this community.
U to vrijeme bio sam voditelj jedne zajednice.
I had wrote 4 books, 2 of them bestsellers, one's an international bestseller.
Napisao sam 4 knjige, 2 od njih bile su bestselleri.
We had done retreats over 300 in Ireland, all massive retreats in cathedrals, parish missions. I was traveling all over the world. I've been to 56 countries.
Držao sam duhovne obnove po cijeloj Irskoj, velike duhovne obnove u katedralama, župama, putovao po svijetu, po raznim zemljama.
At that point, I think I had spoken to over 3 million people around the world.
U to vrijeme mislim da sam govorio pred preko 3 milijuna ljudi u cijelom svijetu.
Including 500,000 at one talk in World Youth Day in Sydney.
Uključujući i 500,000 mladih na jednom danu mladih u Sidneju.
I have been on television in lots of countries, TV, radio.
Bio sam na televiziji u mnogim zemljama, na radiju.
And I'm thinking there's nothing I'm afraid of.
I mislio sam si, pa ničeg se ne bojim.
I love my life.
Volim svoj život.
I'm so happy, I'm so free.
Radostan sam i slobodan.
And I felt Jesus say, what about when you was being abused?
A onda sam osjetio kako mi Isus govori, a šta o onom vremenu kad si bio zlostavljan?
What about the fear you felt then?
Šta sa onim strahom koji si tada osjećao?
And I felt a bit mystified because I said, but you've healed that child.
I bio sam malo zbunjen jer sam mu rekao, pa ti si Gospodine iscijelio to dijete.
But I felt Jesus say that child is still you.
Ali osjetio sam kako mi Gospodin govori, to dijete si još uvijek ti.
That child still needs a hug.
To dijete još uvijek treba zagrljaj.
Give him to my mother.
Daj to dijete mojoj majci.
So that she can give him to me.
Tako da ga ona može predati meni.
I started crying and crying and crying.
Ja sam počeo plakati i plakati.
I mean higging crying where you go.
I jecati, dolaziti do zraka.
And I remember my friend nudged me.
I sjećam se kako me prijateljica onako malo trknula.
And she said, you're such a wuss.
I rekao, pa joj, pa ti si...
Because all the kids were looking at me.
Pa ti si takav slabić jer sva djeca su se okretala i gledala u mene.
But I realized I was still vulnerable inside.
Ali osjetio sam kako sam još uvijek ranjiv unutrini.
So now regularly, since then, I give my child to Our Lady.
I od tada to dijete u sebi redovito predajem našoj majci.
I give my childhood to Our Lady.
Predajem svoje djetinjstvo našoj majci.
Whether you've had cigarettes put out on you,
Sorry?
whether you've had cigarettes put out
Je li
on you,
neko imao opuške koje je neko gasio na njegovoj koži?
whether your innocence has been violated,
Je li vaša nevinost bila zlorabljena?
whether you've suffered mental abuse,
Jeste li patili od mentalnog zlostavljanja?
where you're told you're not worth anything,
Je li vam bilo rečeno da ništa ne vrijedite?
or maybe you've just been told at times that you are not good.
Ili vam je jednostavno bilo rečeno povremeno da niste dobri?
Whether you've been rejected,
Jeste li bili odbačeni?
every one of us has had wounds in our childhood.
Svako od nas nosi rane iz djetinjstva.
It said on that paper that I read that 97% of families are dysfunctional
Na onom papiru koji sam čitao pisalo je da je 97% obitelji disfunkcionalno
in some form or another.
u jednom obliku ili drugom.
And I was very mystified to find the 3% that wasn't.
I bio sam jako zbunjen kako naći onih 3% koji nisu.
The most perfect family there ever was,
Najsavršenija obitelj koja postoji
and probably ever likely to be.
i koja će ikada postojati.
There was one person who was immaculately conceived.
U njoj je jedna osoba dakle bezgrešno začeta.
There was the child who had no sin and was completely divine and human.
U njoj je bilo dijete koje nije imalo nikakvog grijeha i bilo je nebesko i božansko.
But there was a foster father who was not born immaculately conceived. He had original sin.
No tu je bio poočim koji nije bio bezgrešno začet i koji nije bio bez grijeha.
And became one of the greatest saints we've ever known.
I postao je jedan od najvećih svetaca koje poznajemo.
So if that's the most perfect family, where's this 3% from?
Ako je to ta savršena obitelj, gdje je onih 3%?
I use that because none of you, please God, has suffered the abuse I suffered as a kid.
To spominjem zato što rijetko ko je prošao takvo zlostavljanje koje sam ja prošao kao dijete.
But all of you have suffered some form of hurt.
Ali svi ste prošli određene povrede.
And if you find there's areas of you which you have no control over,
I ako nađete ta područja u sebi nad kojima nemate kontrolu,
if you have low self-esteem, low self-worth,
ako imate nisko samopoštovanje i samopouzdanje,
then I would say to you, let Our Lady take you through the cross.
Onda vam preporučam da pustite Gospu da vas provede kroz križ,
Where Jesus paid the price for everything,
gdje je Isus platio cijenu za sve
and let her set us free
i neka nas ona oslobodi.
by giving us to Jesus.
Tako što nas predaje Isusu.
And that is our journey to freedom.
I to je naše putovanje u slobodu.
And then I believe we're ready,
I onda vjerujem da smo spremni,
as my good friend David was ready,
kao što je moj dobri prijatelj David bio spreman,
to become the saints God wants us to be,
postati sveci kakve Bog želi da postanemo.
and to taste heaven on earth.
I da kušamo nebo na zemlji.
A life without fear,
Život bez straha,
without worry,
bez brige,
because every single concern,
jer svaka zabrinutost,
you know God the Father is giving you everything.
nema potrebe za njom jer Bog Otac nam daje sve.
And you're free to trust Him.
I slobodni smo vjerovati mu.
And that is my journey so far.
I to je moje putovanje do ovog trenutka.
It's a great journey.
to je jedno divno putovanje.
I don't want to live any of that crucifixion again.
Ne bih htio prolaziti kroz ono raspeće ponovno.
But I thank Gospel every day that I did.
Ali svaki dan zahvaljujem Gospi što jesam to prošao.
I thank Jesus every day that I did.
Svaki dan zahvaljujem Isusu na tome.
Because I love my life so much.
Jer svoj život tako jako volim.
Amen.
Amen.